I'll start off. My name's Martin Ward. I'm the UK's Chief Plant Health Officer for another few weeks, and in January I head to Paris to take up the reins at the European and Mediterranean Plant Protection Organisation, so doing similar work but for a network of 50 countries rather than for just one. And what I want to talk about is a little bit about how we do plant health in the UK, how that's been affected by ash dieback, of all things, and how the risk register of risks to plant health is coming on, one of the recommendations emerging from ash dieback, and something about the implications specifically for the potato sector. So effectively try to answer the question of what those things at the top have to do with the things at the bottom. And the things at the top on the right hand is the symptoms of ash dieback, a tree with terminal dieback showing fairly clearly, and on the left, on the overwintered leaf rachises, the little apothecia, the fungal fruiting bodies which produce the spores that cause ash dieback. It's a very simple disease to control. You just have to pick up all the leaves, and that solves the problem. The term biosecurity came into the title, and I've given in the handout, there's a more complicated description of biosecurity. It's a term you might start to hear more often. It's been used in the past in animal health circles, but also by Australia and New Zealand in a much wider context. And since our Secretary of State went on a visit to Australia and New Zealand, he's been talking about biosecurity strategy. And it's really about stopping harmful organisms moving around. We should perhaps qualify that. It's stopping non-human harmful organisms moving around. There's a limit to what we can do, but stopping harmful things getting to places where they're not at present, covering invasive species, covering animal health, covering plant health. And what we tend to mean by plant health is really what you could call plant biosecurity, plant quarantine, keeping pests out of areas where they don't currently occur. But some people use the term plant health rather more widely to include healthy planting material and also availability of controls for pests and diseases that are widespread. How we organise plant health, I'm sorry, PowerPoint always does this to that particular format of slide. It loses the second half of the title. But how we organise plant health in the UK is really set out in the Plant Health Act, which says trees go to the Forestry Commission, everything else goes to the agriculture departments like DEFRA. And there's a little bit of logic in that trees are rather different from potatoes, but in other ways there are a lot of similarities. The international regime for plant health controls is the same, the EU directive is the same, a lot of the underlying science of diagnostics, of epidemiological modelling and so on is the same. So we work very closely together. There's a thing called the UK Plant Health Strategy Board, which brings together the Forestry Commission, DEFRA, devolved administrations and FERA. And there's an advisory forum which includes key UK stakeholders, including Mike Story from Potato Council and Gerard Croft and others with specific potato interests, that look at the whole of plant health strategy across the UK for all different sizes of plants. And it starts with looking for what's on the way that might cause damage here, horizon scanning through science networks, through industry networks, and through organisations like EPPO, which spreads a monthly intelligence report on where organisms are cropping up for the first time, and which has an alert list of things that the member countries need to be looking out for. Once you know that something's on its way or might be on its way, you need to carry out a more detailed analysis of what damage it might cause when it arrives in this country, in our climate, with our crops. What pathways might it spread by to arrive in the country and to spread around once it gets here? And what can we do about it, if anything? Can we close off those pathways? Can we regulate them? Can the industry help to manage them more effectively? And each year we publish about 10 to 15 risk assessments for comment, for any additional evidence, for your views on what the best mitigations are. Is this a pest that should be regulated? Is it one that should be left to the industry to deal with? Is it one where there's frankly not much that can be done collectively and it's down to individual growers to control as best they can? And there's a small group called the Plant Health Risk Group, which reports to the strategy board and which coordinates that process of risk assessment and consultation. And it also feeds agreed UK lines then into the EU Standing Committee on Plant Health, which considers risk mitigation at that level, what organisms should be regulated at EU level, and are the regulations working. So that's how things work up to the point just over 12 months ago at which we experience what we still don't quite know what to call it actually. It was an ash dieback something or other, but whether it was a crisis or an outbreak or a finding or a case of mass hysteria in parts of the media is a bit of an open question. But whatever it was, it resulted in a hugely increased interest in everything to do with plant health. And it brought into the plant health discussion lots of stakeholders who hadn't previously heard of plant health. For example, the woodland conservation charities who found they'd been planting trees that they thought were UK grown because they were of UK seed provenance, but the seed had actually gone out to Germany, Poland to be grown for a few years, potentially picked up Cholera ash dieback and then been brought back into the country. And there was a great deal of I think anger and concern that they thought they might have been unwittingly responsible for introducing this disease. As it turns out, it's fairly clear that the spore's also blown across the channel, so even if they hadn't been trading in the plants, it would have got to us at some stage. But we weren't adequately prepared in terms of informing people of the risks and what was likely to happen, and that was another reason why there was so much additional interest, that government didn't seem to be well prepared for something that we should have been able to see coming. So we've got a lot of new stakeholders, a lot of awareness, and the Secretary of State asked to have a task force established of academics under Chris Gilligan of Cambridge University to look at the whole area of plant health and how we do it and how we should do it better. And that task force reported in May of this year. It was a sensible set of recommendations, I think. It was an independent view from the academics, but they were aware of what they didn't know and where they needed to take advice, and they took that advice and used it sensibly. But a couple of important things I think about that report that we managed to achieve during all of the excitement and interest on ash dieback and all the immediate response to that problem was that we should look at plant health in the round. We shouldn't just take off trees and say, well, let's have a strategy and approach for trees, but we should look also at all of the other areas of plant health and at the experience of other sectors such as potatoes, where the experience is very different and I would say perhaps deeper and longer than it is perhaps within some aspects of the tree nursery sectors. And by referring to it as tree health and plant biosecurity, we were able to keep all of that together. And I think with consequences for the potato sector that I'll come on to at the end. The other element is that we were able to convince people that we didn't need to tear everything up and start again. We weren't starting with a blank sheet. There were plant pests and pathogens that were well regulated, that were effectively tackled by government and industry working together, and we could draw on those good examples and look at what went wrong and how we improve the systems without starting again from scratch, or taking, for example, an animal health model and bringing that to bear. Not that there aren't things we can learn from animal health, but we frankly don't have the resources to do things the way that our animal health colleagues do them. But having said that, we have now got a Secretary of State who's on record as saying that he wants plant health treated just as seriously as animal health, and who am I to disagree with the Secretary of State? I won't go through the task force recommendations in detail. They're there in the report and better explained there. But the core one was to develop a register of risks to plant health in the UK, and that's the one I'll come back to and say a little bit more about later. Second one was to appoint a senior level chief plant health officer. It's a job I've been doing for 3 or 4 years, but doing it sort of hidden away within an agency. And one of the first responses to cholera when it hit was that I was called back into DEFRA in order to be able to provide advice direct to ministers from an area of plant health expertise, and my successor, when they're appointed in February or March, will have that standing and that influence right from the start. And I hope if it's someone who doesn't know the potato sector, then I'll make sure in the notes that I leave them that they need to get on and get to know the potato sector well as part of their induction. The improvement of contingency planning, so that we need to not only assess risks before they come, but also sort out what we're going to do when the risk hits. And we need to sort that out not within government, but in a collaborative process with the industry, so that we've not just got contingency plans, but our contingency plan is the same contingency plan as yours, and you feel as much sense of ownership of it as we do. There's a bit about governance there. There's better use of epidemiological intelligence from other countries. Sorry, I can't read these, but I can try to remember them. There's improving the EU regime. We've got an opportunity at the moment for rewriting the EU plant health rules and improving them very significantly, which the advisory forum has been closely involved in the detail of that. Strengthening biosecurity, and improving and bringing together the information systems on pests and pathogens, so there's a single window for getting the best up-to-date information on what the risks are and what we can do about them, and looking at skills and capability, where we're going to get in future the people to carry out the risk analyses, the people to advise on how we deal with outbreaks, the mycologists, the entomologists, the bacteriologists, who, when we look around, we think they're all getting rather elderly now, and we need to look at what courses, what training there is available that will bring through the next generation of those experts. It's all very well developing molecular technology for diagnostics, and there's a great deal of that expertise now being brought to bear, but without the people who understand the organisms, that only gets you part of the way to a solution. Now, what do I say? A little bit more about the risk register. The idea was to have a comprehensive register of risks to plant health, so that individual decisions on individual pests could be taken in the context of the overall picture. It isn't just about ash dieback, it isn't just about chestnut blight, it isn't just about ring rot, it's about, well, we've got on the risk register so far 650 organisms which in some sense threaten our crops and our ecosystems, and which each need a different approach to reflect the different risks they present. And over the last 6 months, we've been working very hard to get a phase 1 risk register into a form where it can be published by the end of the year. And we're on course for that. And it's a risk register in similar format as corporate risk registers, where you've got what's the risk, what's the baseline risk before you put in place any mitigations, what are the mitigations in terms of regulation, in terms of things like the safe haven scheme for seed potatoes, in terms of industry awareness and research, and then what's the mitigated risk? Is the mitigated risk still unacceptably high? If it is, what are you going to do about it? Or what is who going to do about it? And that's both for government and for industry. And the core of it are 3 factors. There's the likelihood of the risk materialising. It's usually the risk of introduction, so the pest actually coming in and establishing. The likelihood, the impact if it does on that particular sector, and then the value of that sector. So each of those 3 factors on a 1 to 5 scale, multiply them together to get a UK risk rating on a 1 to 125 scale, and then apply some colours to make it all a bit visual. And that's really the core of the risk register. Therefore, you've got the 3 unmitigated scores and the overall risk rating, a set of mitigations down the middle, mitigated risks, and then some actions. And that's a little bit of the top of the risk register and a little bit of the bottom of the risk register. And I don't know whether you can read the text. You shouldn't be able to, because it's not published. So if any of you can read anything, if you just wouldn't mind just taking your glasses off for the moment and focusing on the overall layout. But what I hope you can see is that at the top, where we've got high levels of mitigated risk, there are quite a lot of actions. Those are the things where we're saying this is a high risk. We need to do more about it. We need to do more research. We need to regulate more strongly. We need to raise awareness. We need to do more contingency planning. Down at the bottom, where you've got very low residual risk, there aren't any actions. We think those risks are successfully dealt with at the moment. And that's a chunk out of the middle, just to show some of the sort of variation we get between the risks that are very well mitigated, a lot of potato pests and diseases that we know about in South America, and they're not going anywhere because potatoes from South America are prohibited. So in those cases you might very well have red on the left-hand side, prohibition as the mitigation, and green or blue on the right-hand side. Other cases where there are very high risks and there's not a great deal we can do about them. Cholera ash dieback being in that category, where there are some things we can do, but we know that that disease is going to spread over the next 10 to 20 years and it's going to cause damage. Quite a lot of issues we've had to put into phase 2 of the risk register work, because we've been cracking on trying to get the work done in 6 months, and we've not been able to do a lot of academic work on exactly how you value a crop, how you value a tree, how you apply social value, what timescales you measure likelihood over, how you express uncertainty. Some of those ratings on the risk register are very clear. We know what the values are. Some there's a great deal of uncertainty about. And so there's a lot more work to be done to refine the risk register in phase 2. Some specific issues for the potato sector. Not surprisingly, in view of we know that potatoes are a very important crop for plant health, vegetatively propagated, relatively new crop to Europe in biological terms, and therefore we spend something between a quarter and a third of the effort of the UK Plant Health Services, I guess, is on potatoes. That may be an England figure that I'm quoting there. It may be higher if we bring Scotland into the picture. And that's reflected. Nearly a quarter of the pests on the risk register are at least potentially a threat to potatoes. There's solanum there in the host lists. And we've said that a lot of the mitigations are effective. We do need to look at things like the entries for potato ring rot. How effective is the mitigation for potato ring rot? From one point of view, when we've had outbreaks, they've been dealt with. Ring rot hasn't got out of those systems and caused problems in the wider potato growing community. But of course the mitigation has been an expensive hit for those who've been most directly affected. So I would say that mitigation's effective, but it's a very expensive mitigation for ring rot, and we need to look at how we reflect that. We need to look at, for example, how we deal with the different species of PCN, how we deal with the different species of Epitrix. Epitrix, quite a good example of something which has been seen coming in Spain and Portugal, and where, in discussion with the industry, we've got measures in place fairly quickly on a European level to reduce the risk of that particular pest, or that particular group of pests arriving. More general conclusions, I suppose. I've spent quite a lot of time over the last year talking to ash tree stakeholders about potatoes, and they've been wondering what the relevance is. And it's really that I think the potato sector has a very mature and very constructive relationship with the government plant health services, with the risks and with the risk mitigations. You know on the whole where your planting material is coming from. You check on the health of your crops. You engage with risks that are on the way. And all of those things seem obvious to us, but it's surprising to me that you have woodland owners who don't know where the plants come from that they're planting, who don't go back and look for 10 years after they've planted them and are surprised when the trees are dead when they go back, who don't really have a clear view of what the different risks are that affect what they've planted. And clearly you can't treat trees and potatoes in the same way, but there are certainly lessons that can be learned across between the sectors. And for example, the Safe Havens scheme has been cited to the Horticultural Trades Association as a sort of model they might want to look at in relation to trees for people who want to plant trees not only UK provenance but locally grown, and therefore a reasonable assurance of freedom from disease. The potato sector trades, it imports and it exports, and it takes, I think, a fairly clear view on the need for sensible, risk-based, rules-based plant health controls, so we don't get knee-jerk calls for banning this and banning that and banning the other. And there's a bit of an analogy there with New Zealand. New Zealand is a country with a very strong awareness of the risks from introduced pests and diseases, but it's also a country that makes a lot of its money from export trade, and it can't afford to have the rest of the world putting up barriers on an unreasonable basis. And that's why New Zealand is a very strong supporter of rules-based, risk-based plant health controls. There are calculated risks taken by the sector at times, but when the risk materialises, the costs are then borne by the sector and not by government. So the overall conclusion, I think, is that there's a great deal of thinking of progress that has been made by the potato sector in dealing with plant health risks that can be applied, can be used in other sectors. That's perhaps not a very positive message for you, but the positive message is that the increased interest in plant health, increased resources in plant health, will lead to some at least stabilisation and some increases in the support for the underlying science. And some of that is relevant across the board. The diagnostic science, the science of epidemiological modelling, early detection so that problems can be spotted quickly and dealt with quickly. All of those we're improving because of the threat to ash trees, but those improvements will have benefits across the board, including to yourselves. Thank you very much.